Welcome to these 23 short, scary stories to ponder on. First, there is a strange sound in the woods. Years ago, a woman named Dr. Danzel, an archaeologist, was finishing a survey in a remote forest with her boss. The rest of the crew had gone home, leaving the two alone, miles away from the nearest town. As they ventured deeper into the woods to finish some mapping, a sense of unease settled around them. Shrugging it off, they continued their work. Suddenly, a loud, reverberating whomp sound echoed through the forest. They stopped, dismissing it as imagination, until it happened again, louder and heavier, like an unseen force pressing down on them. Goosebumps prickling their skin, they abandoned their work and rushed out of the forest. Even years later, Dr. Danzel feels a chill thinking about the ominous sound that haunted that day. 2. When the Saints come marching in. Kiesler and his girlfriend were on a road trip through California when they stopped at an isolated campsite. After setting up camp and enjoying dinner, they settled in for the night. But hours later, they woke to the eerie sound of someone whistling when the Saints come marching in, right outside their tent. They lay frozen, hoping the whistler would go away. Instead, the whistling grew louder and turned to chanting. "When you sleep here, you disrespect me. And when you disrespect me, you disrespect the U.S. Marines." Realizing they were not alone, they quietly left the tent, packed up their car, and escaped to a nearby motel. The next morning, they returned to retrieve their belongings and learned that the whistling and chanting had continued for hours after they left, unnerving a nearby family. To this day, they have no idea who the midnight whistler was or what he wanted. 3. Camping near a serial killer. At 18, Dr. Jim Danger and some friends took a road trip to the Apalachicola National Forest in Florida, searching for seclusion. They set up camp deep in the woods and spent the evening drinking and exploring. As they wandered a nearby trail, they noticed signs of someone living off the land, a campsite, clothes hung to dry, and a dog lounging beside an old van. They were startled when the man living there called them over, but he seemed harmless and offered friendly advice on nearby sites. Months later, Dr. Jim Danger's friend called him, urging him to turn on the news. There, to his horror, he recognized the man they had met. A drifter now on trial for multiple murders committed in national forests across the region. 4. The Rat Plague. While camping in the Florida Keys, Jackman and his group set up camp near an old dump site. A man warned them to move as he planned to burn some of the refuse. They complied, but that night, scratching noises roused them from sleep. Flicking on a flashlight, they were horrified to find their tent swarming with hundreds of rats. They shook them off, climbed out, and spent the night by the fire, unable to sleep. After another sleepless night of rat infestations, they decided to leave. Walking along the road, they stumbled upon a massive dead alligator lying in their path, a final grim farewell to their ill-fated camping trip. 5. The Jersey Devil sighting. At age 12, Reddit user Ed Hash had just watched a spooky episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark, featuring the Jersey Devil when his father took him hunting deep in the woods. As they waited for deer, he spotted a small, shadowy figure in the distance that looked eerily human but tiny, barely 2 or 3 feet tall. For hours he sat quietly, convinced he was staring at the Jersey Devil. When they finally approached the spot to investigate, he was shocked to find not a creature, but an abandoned lawn gnome. Despite the anticlimactic ending, the fear he felt that night has never left him. 6. An old crime scene, Camo Panda often spent summers camping with his father. During one such trip, they found an old rifle embedded in a tree, the wood grown around it over the years. Intrigued, they ventured closer and discovered a small cave. Inside lay belongings from another time. 3 unopened food cans, a rusted pot, a saddle, and a wool blanket. Inside lay belongings from another time. 3 unopened food cans, a rusted pot, a saddle, and a wool blanket. His father estimated the items dated back to the 1870s, suggesting a grisly mystery hidden in the cave for over a century. 7. The Glowing Orbs. Thomas and his family were camping on a lake in Texas, enjoying a game of Pictionary by the fire, when a strange light flew over the lake. They brushed it off as nothing unusual until more lights followed in a steady stream, identical in size and speed, glowing red and yellow as they glided silently over the water. A small white orb chased them, then vanished with the others. When they returned home, they learned that locals from a nearby town had also reported seeing the lights that night, but no one knew what they were. 8. Not alone. Tim and a friend had ventured deep into the Carolina mountains to camp far from civilization. After setting up, they settled around the fire, but a sudden eerie feeling washed over them. They heard a rustling in the darkness, faint but getting closer. Deciding to scare whatever it was, they armed themselves with rocks and branches, charging into the darkness and shouting. Their efforts revealed not a lurking predator, but a herd of mountain ponies, unbothered by their attempts to frighten them off, as if they, too, belonged to the mystery of the mountains. 9. A midnight assault. Alex and friends were camping in the Allegheny National Forest when, out of nowhere, rocks began pelting their tent. They laughed it off at first, assuming it was pranksters, but the feeling quickly changed when they found no one around. Hours later, they were startled awake by a blood-curdling scream echoing through the forest. They lay frozen, straining to listen as silence returned. To this day, they never figured out who or what had thrown the rocks or let out that terrifying scream. 10. Polar bear or pebbles. Camping in the high Arctic, Koshkio heard pebbles rolling down a nearby slope. His first thought was of a polar bear, so he ventured out to investigate but saw nothing. The sound persisted night after night, always the same, a low rumble of stones rolling. Finally, he discovered the cause. As the ice thawed each night, the pebbles would loosen and tumble down. Yet each time he heard the noise, he feared it might actually be a bear, prowling just beyond sight, making every night a nerve-wracking ordeal in the Arctic wild. 11. The man who watched them sleep. While on a 10-day backpacking trip in the remote woods of Maine, Reddit user Trilogy and his wife had hoped for total solitude, not encountering another person for days. One night, as a light drizzle started, they set up a small tent instead of sleeping under the stars. Early the next morning, he crawled out of the tent, stretching, only to freeze in shock. About 30 feet away, a stranger stood still. Staring directly at their tent, Trilogy greeted the man, but he said nothing, his gaze fixed and unblinking, before turning and disappearing back into the dense woods. They spent the next several days alert, feeling like they were never truly alone, haunted by the image of the silent watcher. 13. The old man who begged for help cat was 16 and on a summer camping trip with a youth program. Late one night, they were huddled in a tent, sharing ghost stories, when they heard slow, labored breathing just outside. The heavy panting sounded as if someone had been running, but suddenly stopped right next to their tent. Their chatter died out, replaced by tense silence. Then, a hoarse voice rasped, "Please, help me." Terrified, they unzipped the tent to see a pair of bare, scabbed legs standing there. The man, disheveled and wild-eyed, begged for help but insisted, "No rangers, they keep me here." Before they could react, he broke into sobs and stumbled back into the night, leaving them shaken and sleepless. 14. The witch doctor in the night. On a mission trip to Kenya, Tyzek and his team camped out in the bush, far from any village. Under the bright moonlight, every shadow cast sharp silhouettes on the ground. In the middle of the night, Tyzek woke up to the soft sound of shuffling feet around his tent. Peeking out, he saw the outline of a figure wearing a tall, intricate headdress that gave the silhouette an otherworldly appearance. The figure moved with purpose, circling each tent before disappearing into the night. The next morning, he asked locals about it, and they calmly replied it was probably a witch doctor passing through, performing night rituals for protection or something else unknown. 15. Hawaiian night marchers. Truvan was camping in the Pololu Valley on Hawaii's Big Island. Around 3 a.m., after spotting 2 enormous centipedes crawling in his tent, he packed up and hiked up the valley trail. Reaching the top, he turned to look over the dark expanse of valleys below when he saw it, a line of torchlights flickering in the distance. They moved with a deliberate, steady rhythm, far too uniform for modern hikers. Local lore spoke of the night marchers, the spectral Hawaiian warriors who wander in formation across the valleys under the moon. Though skeptical, he watched in awe as the lights moved across the landscape, before slowly fading into the darkness, leaving him chilled to the core. 16. The mountain lion. After their dog, Steve was hiking back to the car with his friend and their dog in a remote Canadian forest when the dog suddenly lunged, almost yanking free from its leash. Turning around, he saw a full-grown mountain lion barely 2 feet away, crouched and staring intensely at the dog. As he froze, his friend panicked and started running, until he yelled to stop, knowing it would trigger the lion to chase. In a flash, the friend turned and ran toward the mountain lion, shouting and waving his arms, causing the lion to slink back into the trees. Though they thought they were safe, they glanced back every few minutes, only to find it following them, closer each time. It wasn't until they reached the main trail that the mountain lion finally disappeared into the woods. 17. The ocean that vanished. Camping in the Everglades, Sally and her husband found the isolated island to be idyllic. But around 2 in the morning, she woke to an eerie silence. No waves crashing, no ocean sounds. Stepping out of the tent, she aimed her flashlight toward where the ocean had been only hours before, but the beach now stretched out endlessly, water nowhere in sight. Suddenly, they remembered that ocean waters recede just before a tsunami, sending them into a frenzy of fear. They spent hours in terror, scanning the dark horizon for any sign of waves until, at last, the ocean quietly returned, leaving them shaken and deeply grateful for their lives. 18. Come and find me. Mark was hiking through a coastal forest trail with a friend, stumbled upon an overgrown path off the main route. Following the foul stench of decay, they found a makeshift sign propped against a tree. It read, "Come and find me," with an arrow pointing deeper down the trail. As the smell intensified, they stopped, their minds racing with images of what might await down the path. They retreated uneasy and reported it to the authorities. Although they never learned what lay beyond, the combination of the smell and the sign haunted them, each detail filling their minds with dark possibilities. 19. An alien in the backyard. Daniela was only 10 when she encountered something that still gives her chills. It was late at night, and she had her bedroom's sliding glass door open to let in the summer breeze. Suddenly, the automatic light clicked on. She looked out and froze. A figure, dark and tall, was standing at the door looking in. At first, she thought it was a neighbor, but the more she looked, the less human it seemed. It was impossibly thin, with long limbs and a rounded head, almost like a shadow-given form. It stood there, unmoving, before turning and vanishing into the night. Her mother didn't believe her story, but years later, the memory still haunts her. 20. The dogs Warning Raya and a friend were camping in Big Sur with Raya's usually calm, wilderness-trained dog. Around 4 p.m., she started barking wildly, straining at her leash until it snapped, and she bolted into the forest. Panicked, Raya chased her deep into the woods, finally finding her cowering in a small clearing. Carrying her back to camp, she noticed she remained stiff and alert, her ears pricked toward the darkness around them. Then they heard it, a high-pitched, almost human-like laughter echoing through the woods, followed by bone-chilling screams. Paralyzed with fear, they sat in the tent, listening as the sounds faded. They stayed awake, clutching their dog, who was equally tense until dawn's first light. 21. The Hungry Black Bear. While hiking the Appalachian Trail, Urbane knew to hang his food up high to avoid attracting bears. But as he lay in his tent that night, a nightmare jolted him awake in a cold sweat. Realizing it was just a dream, he lay still, trying to calm down. Then he heard it, a loud, rhythmic thud as something massive tried to reach his food bag hung 12 feet off the ground. Peeking out, he saw a huge black bear standing on its hind legs, pawing at the bag. It eventually gave up, but for hours after, he lay awake, gripping his knife, waiting for the slightest sound that might signal its return. 22. A cave. With a resident while hiking off trail in Zimbabwe, Suds and his friends found a hidden cave nestled between boulders. Crawling inside, they discovered a beautiful hidden space lit by a narrow beam of light from above. Excited, they decided to camp in the cave. But in the dead of night, one friend woke everyone, whispering that he'd seen 2 glowing eyes peering in from the entrance. It took a moment for everyone to realize what was happening. A leopard was lying in wait outside. They quickly packed up and quietly retreated to their original campsite, too shaken to sleep, as they realized the leopard had likely been watching them the entire time. 23. 3 knocks on the window. After a visit to Mount St. Helens, Snaggy and his girlfriend stopped at a rest area to eat before driving back home. It was raining, the windows fogged, and the lot was empty. Suddenly, a chilling series of 3 knocks rapped against the driver's side window. Shocked, they looked around but saw no one. The driver's side was facing a steep embankment, with no one else parked nearby. Rolling down the window, they peered out into the darkness, but not a soul was there. Later, they discovered that a man had died at that very rest area during the eruption of Mount St. Helens. Haunted by the experience, Snaggy from Joti couldn't shake the feeling that the knocks were an eerie echo of someone desperately seeking help during the catastrophe. Though they never heard anything else unusual, each time they recall the story, the sound of those 3 knocks replays in their minds. A chilling reminder of a stranger's tragic fate and the strange ways in which the past sometimes reaches out to the present. And there you have it. True tales of terror from the wilderness that remind us why the deep, dark woods aren't for the faint of heart. From eerie whispers to ghostly knocks and unexpected encounters, the forest holds secrets that may be better left undiscovered. If you enjoyed these chilling stories, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. There are countless more tales waiting to be told, and who knows, the next story might just keep you out of the woods for good. Thanks for watching and stay safe out there.